In September 1950, a strange cloud drifted across the waters of San Francisco. At first, no one noticed anything. Fog was common in the city. It rolled in from the Pacific almost every morning. But this cloud was different. It moved slowly across the water, not like fog pushed by ocean winds, but like something spreading. The cloud came from the direction of the open bay, far from the crowded streets, far from the eyes of the people below. Out on the water, a U.S. Navy ship moved quietly through the morning mist. Front, just another military ship passing through the harbor. But on its deck still metal tanks, pressure valves, and a device designed to release a flow. Sailors watched the instruments carefully. Scientists recorded numbers on clipboards. Wind speed, air pressure, temperature. Every detail mattered. Because this was not a routine naval operation. It was a test, a secret experiment, and San Francisco had just become the testing ground. The cloud drifting toward the city was not natural fog. It was something else, something deliberately released into the air. Within minutes, the wind carried it toward the shoreline. The mist moved across the bay, past fishing boats, past cargo ships, and slowly toward the neighborhoods of the city. Thousands of people began their morning without noticing anything unusual. Workers stepped out of streetcars. Shop owners unlocked their doors. Children walked to school. None of them realized what was happening above them, because the experiment had been classified, hidden inside military reports and secret research programs. Even local authorities had not been informed. The entire city had unknowingly become part of a military test. A test designed to answer one terrifying question. What would happen if a biological weapon was released over an American city? The experiment over San Francisco did not begin with the city itself. It began with fear. After World War II, a new kind of conflict had started. The Cold War. Two superpowers faced each other across the world. The United States and the Soviet Union. Both sides feared the same possibility. A new generation of weapons. Weapons that did not explode. Weapons that spread silently. Biological weapons. Scientists had already seen what bacteria and viruses could do. A single microscopic organism could spread through thousands of people. Entire cities could fall ill within days. Military planners began asking dangerous questions. What if an enemy released bacteria over an American city? How fast would it spread? How many people would be exposed? How long would it take before anyone realized what was happening? The answers were unknown, and uncertainty was dangerous. Inside the U.S. military, new research programs began quietly expanding. Scientists studied bacteria. Chemists examined methods of dispersal. Military strategists imagined worst-case scenarios. What if Soviet aircraft released biological agents over major cities? What if submarines launched secret attacks from the coastline? What if the first warning came only after hospitals began filling with patients? These questions frightened military planners. Because the United States had almost no real data, no one knew how biological particles would behave in a real city. Wind patterns were unpredictable. Urban environments were complex. Tall buildings could trap airborne particles. Streets could channel contaminated air for miles. To understand the threat, the military believed they needed real-world tests. Not in laboratories, not in simulations, but in actual cities. And that idea led to one of the most controversial experiments of the Cold War. The operation would soon receive a classified name, Operation Sea Spray. And San Francisco would become the first large-scale test. By 1949, military scientists were under increasing pressure. The Cold War was escalating rapidly. Both superpowers feared a new kind of attack. Not bombs, not missiles, but invisible weapons. Inside U.S. military laboratories, researchers studied bacteria carefully. Some microbes could survive in the air. Others could spread quickly through human populations. The question was no longer theoretical. Could a biological weapon contaminate an entire city? To answer that, the Navy needed real data. Laboratory experiments were not enough. Cities were complicated environments. Wind moved between buildings. Air currents shifted along street. Particles behaved differently in crowded urban area. Scientists needed to observe what would happen in a real city. So planners began searching for a suitable location. They needed a large population, a coastal environment, and predictable winds. San Francisco quickly became the ideal candidate. The city faced the open Pacific. Ocean winds regularly moved inland through the bay. If a biological agent were released offshore, the wind would carry it across the city. Researchers could track how far the particles traveled, how quickly they spread, and how many people might be exposed. The Navy began designing the experiment. It would be conducted from a ship. The vessel would sail through the waters of San Francisco Bay. Onboard equipment would release microscopic particles into the air. To observers, it would look like a harmless mist, but the experiment had a classified objective: to simulate a biological attack on an American city. The operation received a secret name: Operation Sea Spray. Few people outside the military knew it existed. Even fewer understood what it was meant to test. But once the plan was approved, preparations began immediately. Because the Navy was about to test something never attempted before. They were going to release bacteria into the air above a major American city, and the people living there would never be warned. In late September 1950, the experiment was ready. The Navy ship moved quietly into San Francisco Bay. The morning air was cool and calm. A light wind blew inland from the ocean. Perfect conditions for the test. On the deck of the vessel, technicians prepared the equipment. Metal tanks were connected to spraying devices. Pressure gauges were carefully checked. Scientists reviewed their notes. Everything had to be precise. Wind direction, humidity, air pressure. Each factor could change how the particles traveled. The order was finally given. The system was activated. A fine mist began to rise from the ship. At first, it looked like nothing more than ocean spray. But the mist carried millions of microscopic particles, bacteria released intentionally into the air. The cloud slowly expanded. The wind carried it across the water toward the skyline of San Francisco. From the ship, the city looked peaceful. Morning traffic moved through the streets. Streetcars rolled along their tracks. Fishermen prepared their boats in the harbor. No one noticed the cloud approaching. It drifted silently across the bay, past Alcatraz Island, past the Golden Gate Bridge, and then it reached the city. The invisible particles spread through the neighborhoods, carried through streets and alleys, through parks and busy intersections. People walked through the mist without realizing it. They breathed the air normally, unaware they were part of a military experiment. On the ship, instruments began recording results. Air samplers collected particles. Researchers measured how far the cloud traveled. The data would reveal something important: just how easily bacteria could spread across a major city. Within hours, the test was complete. The mist slowly disappeared into the atmosphere. The ship turned away from the bay, and the city continued its day as if nothing had happened. But the consequences of the experiment were only beginning to appear. Because soon, doctors in San Francisco would begin noticing something unusual. and the investigation that followed would raise troubling questions. Questions about what had really been released over the city, and why no one had been warned. In the days after the experiment, nothing seemed unusual. San Francisco continued its normal rhythm. Shops opened, ships entered the harbor. Streetcars moved through the busy streets. But inside several hospitals, doctors noticed something strange. A rare bacterial infection had appeared. The illness was unusual. Most physicians had never seen it before. Patients began arriving with similar symptoms: high fever, severe weakness, blood infections. Laboratory technicians began studying the bacteria. The organism was identified as Serratia marcescens, a microbe rarely associated with human illness. At first, doctors believed the cases were random, but the number of infections slowly increased. Soon hospitals began comparing reports. Something unusual was happening. One patient became especially concerning. His condition worsened rapidly. Despite treatment, the infection spread through his body. Within days, the patient died. The case alarmed hospital staff. Why had such a rare bacterium appeared so suddenly? And why were several patients infected at the same time? Doctors began searching for explanations. Contaminated equipment, water supply issues, laboratory errors. None of the theories fully explained the outbreak. At the time, no one connected the illness to the strange cloud over the bay, because no one outside the military even knew the test had happened. The experiment remained secret, hidden in classified naval reports. To the people of San Francisco, the infections were simply a medical mystery. But decades later, researchers would look back at those hospital records, and they would notice something disturbing. The first infections appeared just days after the Navy's experiment, and the bacteria found in the hospitals matched the organism released during Operation Sea Spray. What had once seemed like coincidence began to look very different, because the evidence suggested that the military test had not remained harmless. It may have exposed an entire city to bacteria, and the people who lived there had never been told. After the experiment, the Navy filed its reports. The data was detailed and extensive. Scientists measured how far the bacteria had traveled. Air samples showed the particles had spread across large parts of the city. From the military's perspective, the test was a success. The bacteria had dispersed exactly as expected. The cloud had reached thousands of people, and the spread across the city had been carefully recorded. But the public never heard about the results. The reports were classified, locked inside military archives. Even many government officials never saw them. To the residents of San Francisco, the strange infections remained unexplained. Doctors moved on to other cases. Hospitals closed their investigations, and life in the city returned to normal. Years passed, then decades. The Cold War continued. New weapons were developed. New secret programs began, and Operation Sea Spray slowly faded into obscurity. The documents remained buried inside military files. Few researchers even knew the experiment had existed. But in the 1970s, something began to change. Investigations into secret military research were expanding. Journalists started asking questions. Scientists began reviewing old Cold War programs. And hidden inside the archives, they discovered something disturbing. A report describing a biological test over San Francisco. The document revealed details few people expected. The Navy had intentionally released bacteria over the city, without warning, without consent, and without telling the people who had been exposed. When the information finally became public, it shocked many researchers, because the test had not taken place in an isolated desert. It had taken place over a city filled with civilians. and the people living there had unknowingly become part of a military experiment. The revelation raised serious questions. Questions about ethics, questions about responsibility, and questions about how many other experiments might still be hidden in the archives. During the investigation, researchers discovered something unexpected. San Francisco had not been the only experiment. The military had conducted similar tests in other cities. Many of them were also secret. One of the most surprising experiments took place in New York. In 1966, scientists released bacteria inside the subway system. The test was designed to measure how particles moved through tunnels. Researchers wanted to know how quickly contamination could spread. Agents dropped light bulbs filled with bacteria onto subway tracks. When the bulbs shattered, the bacteria spread through the air. Trains passing through the tunnels carried the particles farther. Within minutes, they moved through multiple stations. Passengers continued their daily commute. Thousands of people walked through the contaminated air. None of them knew an experiment was taking place. Scientists later collected samples across the subway system. They found that the bacteria had spread rapidly. The results shocked many researchers. A biological agent could travel through a city faster than expected. Another series of experiments took place across large areas of the United States. This program was known as Operation Large Area Coverage. During the 1950s and 1960s, aircraft released particles over several regions. The goal was to study how biological agents might travel through the atmosphere. Particles were released over hundreds of miles. Sensors across the country recorded their movement. Military scientists were trying to answer one critical question. How far could biological particles travel before dispersing? The results were alarming. Some particles traveled hundreds of miles, carried by winds high in the atmosphere. These findings confirmed the fears of Cold War planners. Biological weapons could spread far beyond their original target. But these experiments also raised serious ethical concerns. Many of them had taken place without public knowledge, and in some cases, without any warning to civilians. As more documents became public, the scale of the testing became clearer. Dozens of experiments had been conducted across the country. Many of them remained unknown to the public for years. The Cold War had created a climate of extreme secrecy, and that secrecy allowed dangerous experiments to remain hidden. Operation Sea Spray was only one part of a much larger story. A story that revealed how far governments were willing to go, all in the name of national security. When the documents finally became public, the reaction was immediate. Many people were shocked. For decades, residents of San Francisco had known nothing about the experiment. Now they were learning that their city had once been used as a testing ground. Journalists began examining the newly released reports. Scientists reviewed the data collected during the operation. And historians started connecting the experiment to the hospital cases from 1950. The story spread quickly. Newspapers published articles describing the secret test. Television programs discussed the Cold War experiments. Public debate grew louder. Many asked the same question: how could such a test have been approved? Why had civilians never been warned? For some families, the issue was personal. One man's death during the bacterial outbreak became central to the controversy. His relatives believed the experiment had played a role in the infection. They filed legal action against the government. The case moved slowly through the courts. Lawyers argued over the scientific evidence. Experts debated whether the bacteria released by the Navy could cause illness. In the end, the court ruled in favor of the government. The judges concluded that the link between the experiment and the death had not been proven. But the case left many questions unanswered, because even if the bacteria were considered harmless by the military, the experiment had still exposed an entire city without consent. For critics, that was the real issue. During the Cold War, secrecy had allowed dangerous decisions to remain hidden, and Operation Sea Spray had become one of the most controversial examples. The experiment forced many Americans to reconsider the limits of government power. It raised a difficult question: how far should a government go in the name of national security? And who decides when that line has been crossed? Operation Sea Spray eventually became one of the most controversial Cold War experiments. For many Americans, the story was deeply unsettling. A major U.S. city had been used as a testing ground, and the people living there had never been warned. Historians later discovered that San Francisco was not the only test site. Throughout the Cold War, the military conducted similar experiments. Some took place in deserts, others in remote locations, but a few were conducted in populated areas. In New York City, bacteria were once released inside the subway system. The purpose was similar: to study how particles moved through crowded urban environments. Military planners believed the research was necessary. They feared biological attacks from enemy nations. Understanding how such weapons could spread was considered vital. But critics argued the experiments crossed a dangerous line. Civilians had unknowingly become test subjects, and secrecy had prevented any public debate. Over time, the controversy forced changes. Government oversight of biological research increased. New rules required stricter ethical standards. Experiments involving human exposure faced far greater scrutiny. Yet, Operation Sea Spray remains an important reminder of that era, a time when fear of global conflict shaped many decisions, and when national security often outweighed public transparency. The Cold War produced remarkable scientific advances, but it also produced experiments that many now question. The strange cloud that drifted over San Francisco in 1950 was only one example. An invisible mist carried by the wind across a quiet city. Most people who walked beneath it never knew it existed. But decades later, the story still raises difficult questions. Questions about secrecy, about trust, and about the hidden experiments that may still remain buried in history. Because the Cold War left behind many classified files, and not all of them have been opened. Some stories remain hidden in archives, waiting to be discovered, and waiting to reveal just how far governments were willing to go in the name of security. The cloud that drifted across San Francisco in 1950 disappeared within hours. But the questions it created never really disappeared, because the experiment revealed something unsettling. In the struggle for national security, governments were willing to test dangerous ideas in secret, even if civilians became part of the experiment. And history suggests that Operation Sea Spray was only one of many.